Okay, uh, we'll we'll make a start now. Um, Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I have to tell you that this session is being recorded, so if you're not okay with that, you might want to leave right now. Of course, this is to make the recording available later on to all of you and to others who couldn't be present. So thank you very much for your attendance to this media briefing. I'm Gonçalo Carvalho. I'm from one of the NGOs who is hosting this online event, which will be the launch of a joint paper on EU marine biodiversity by a nice coalition of NGOs. This paper presents how key marine policy gaps in the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030 can be overcome, and puts forward the NGO's recommendations for areas of improvement in many documents, but particularly in the EU Parliament's own initiative report on biodiversity strategy, which was presented this afternoon. So, as you all know, all life on the planet came from the ocean, and all life on the planet depends on the ocean. Without an healthy and functioning ecosystem, marine ecosystem, life would be unbearable. We need to help it in a way in order to help ourselves. And we all know that EU seas are feeling the heat, let's say. The member states have failed to achieve the good environmental status for our seas, and the combined impacts are on a path to cross complex planetary boundaries, which we don't even fully understand. But we know that this might trigger irreversible changes to the ecological conditions under which humanity has evolved and thrived. President von der Leyen and many EU heads of state or governments have joined the Leaders' Pledge for Nature in the UN Summit on Biodiversity, committing themselves to reverse the biodiversity loss by 2030. The European Commission's Biodiversity Strategy is a blueprint for delivering on that pledge. These and other high-level documents and agreements all set an intention to transform the way we do things in order to save life on the planet. But we do need more than promises. The Back to the Source document, which we'll present this afternoon, is a toolkit of 10 ocean-related actions that EU decision makers, including the Commission, the Member States, and the MEPs, can use to translate the biodiversity strategy and other commitments into tangible and binding action. So we will now have presentations from representatives of 5 of the NGOs that put together this paper, and they will reveal a bit more of the detail of some of the sections that make up this document. After that, these presentations will be 5 minutes each. After that, we will open the floor for questions, especially to our journalists audience, which are attending today. In the meantime, you can write your questions on the Q&A chat box so that our speakers can start thinking of the response. Otherwise, we will start a Q&A open process where you can turn on your mic and your video and put your question directly. So with no further delay, I would give the floor to Rebecca Hubbard from Our Fish, who will be our first presenter this afternoon. Beck, if you may.
Hello and good afternoon. Sorry, I have 2 presentations that I am just going to share, so I won't be a moment. That is not working. 1 second. Excellent. So moving that to the right view. So I will just be speaking. You can see my front screen now, right? My title page. I'll be talking about the opportunity and, in fact, the need to save Europe's biodiversity and maximize climate and ecosystem benefits of fisheries. Please let me know, Gonçalo, if you're not seeing the right slides. So the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 includes a commitment to develop an action plan to protect marine ecosystems and fisheries resources in 2021. This action plan provides a long overdue opportunity to address the broad scale impacts of destructive fishing and overfishing, and to strengthen the ocean's capacity to mitigate and adapt to climate change. As the IPBES reported last year, fishing is the largest impact of marine biodiversity, and so we must manage it in a way that reflects this impact and decreases it for all species. As Gonzalo rightly pointed out, of course, the ocean is fundamental to life on Earth, so protecting marine biodiversity is fundamental and should be a major focus for the EU Biodiversity Strategy. The action plan must highlight the need for fisheries management to now focus on allowing fish populations to be restored to and maintained at healthy levels that will enable fish to perform the ecosystem services and marine ecosystem services that are critical for life on the planet and for humans, and to ensure that marine species and habitats are healthy and thriving. For too long, the approach has been just to maximize extraction regardless of the cost. And so the biodiversity strategy, and indeed this action plan specifically, provide an opportunity to change that focus. Strong support from the EU Parliament is also very important for this action plan to ensure that it supports productive, resilient fisheries in the future. So we have a couple of key elements which should be incorporated into this action plan and should be reflected within the EU report as well. So one of the key things which isn't currently existing in EU policy and legislation are precautionary buffers for climate change when setting fishing limits. Additionally, environmental impact assessments of fishing activities is a key opportunity, and in fact, really, when you look at environmental impact assessments of other activities, they're required for most activities. And considering that fishing is the biggest impact on marine biodiversity, the fact that we don't have them is really a clear problem. These impact assessments can and need to look at the impact on food webs, on non-target species and protected species, physical disturbance, like on habitats and seafloor, and also on the capacity of these marine environments and marine ecosystems to mitigate and adapt to climate change, such as carbon-rich habitats, coastal protection, but also on the fish populations themselves. The action plan should also include increased measures to minimise bycatch, clear and transparent set of environmental and social criteria for allocating fish quota, and a drastic improvement in monitoring and control of fishing activities, because as we all know, there are serious concerns around data, the full documentation of fishing catches and impacts. So some of these things are new and some build on existing commitments that haven't been delivered. Definitely one of the EU's outstanding barriers to protecting marine biodiversity is its failure to implement existing laws. In closing, the 2030 Biodiversity Strategy can only be successful if it ensures a doubling down on implementation of existing laws and further strengthens these by drastically improving the ocean's capacity to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And that is my presentation. I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Beck. We will now have Andrea Rippel from Seas at Risk. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Gonzalo. Let me share my screen. Wait. share screen here. Share. Okay, can you see it? Right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrea Ripoll from Seas at Risk, and I'm going to explain how fisheries impacts on sensitive species and harmful fisheries subsidies should be tackled under the Strategy for Biodiversity 2030. The main impact of fisheries on sensitive species is its bycatch, which is the incidental catch of animals in fishing nets and fishing gear. One of the recognized globally main threat for many species that are endangered around the world is bycatch. And we are talking about marine mammals, turtles, sharks, or seabirds. Here we have some of the statistics we count with. Every year, more than 200,000 seabirds die as bycatch in European waters, or that every winter, over 10,000 common dolphins die in fishing nets over a 3-month period in the Bay of Biscay only. This is to have an overview of the scale of the problem, and these numbers are only actually estimates because the current data we count with about the scale of the problem is either inadequate or directly lacking. So in order to properly solve the problem of bycatch of sensitive species in the EU, we need not only mitigation measures in place in the fishing gear, but also monitoring and data collection programs in terms of what is the relation between the species, the sensitive species, and the fisheries activity. This is a problem that has been recognized in the European Commission communication on the Biodiversity Strategy and also in the draft report from the Parliament, because there is a commitment to tackle this problem and to minimize and where possible eliminate bycatch. However, there is no clear plan. And for us, this is worrying because it sounds a bit like the status quo, as we have had for decades a lot of regulations and legal requirements for member states to implement these measures to prevent and to end the problem of bycatch of sensitive species, and very little has been done. Here, for example, in this table, we can see all the member states that didn't put in place the right measures to mitigate cetacean bycatch under the Habitats Directive and under the cetacean regulation. So for us, what we are proposing is that the issue of bycatch is tackled under the Fisheries Action Plan that is proposed by the Commission in their communication, in the way that there is a development of a set of common rules that is applied across all sea basins equally, and it's not just leaving it up to member states to implement the usual or the regular legislation that they have been having to date, and it's more centralized, let's say like that. And this plan should be including robust long-term monitoring of the sensitive species status, adequate data collection of the interactions between the fisheries activity and the species, and also the application of the right measures to prevent and mitigate the bycatch. Then, in terms of fisheries subsidies, this is also an issue that needs to be addressed under the strategy, and it is indeed kind of addressed, because without the right financial support, we cannot really have sustainable fisheries or a healthy ocean. So this is something already widely recognized internationally as per the Sustainable Development Goal Commitment 14.6, where global leaders committed to end harmful fisheries subsidies by 2020. We have not really met this objective yet. And what we have seen in the proposal of the Commission is a vague commitment to keep on promising and hoping to end harmful fisheries subsidies, but not really with a clear plan again. And in the case of the European Parliament, we see that they go even a step further, and they plan a phase out of these harmful subsidies by 2030, which for us, this is totally not ambitious enough if we take into account that by 2020, by last year, we should have achieved this objective, and now we are postponing it again 10 years till 2030. So for us NGOs, this is a red flag, and in order to match the policies that the European Commission is promising under the European Green Deal, they really need the proper financial support. And what they need to do is to ensure that no harmful subsidies are as a matter of urgency in the European Maritime Fisheries Fund that is now being revised, in the state aid guidelines as well, that is with an upcoming revision, and also the fuel tax exemption that is granted to the fishing sector should be removed in the upcoming revision of the Energy Taxation Directive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Right on the mark. Next, we have Nicolas Fournier from Oceana. Nico, the floor is yours. We can see your presentation. You can turn on your camera as well. We cannot hear you, Nick.
Can you see me and hear me now?
Yes.
Great.
Please go ahead.
All right. You can see my presentation, great. So I'm Nicolas Fournier, I'm working for Oceana, I'm the campaign director, and I'll be discussing the priorities in the context of our joint position paper, specifically on the issue of protecting marine habitats and marine protected areas, and as well as tackling bottom trawling in Europe. So while the European Biodiversity Strategy and its marine targets are welcomed by the NGOs and currently in discussion in the European Parliament, we believe that the Parliament can and must further strengthen the ambition, because we need to have binding targets to support an effective delivery of marine conservation that supports also resilient and healthy oceans and sustain the people that depends on it. So we specifically request the Parliament to support this ambitious target of protecting 1/3 of all marine areas, both in the EU and internationally. So we want to really support this 30% by having dedicated wording on having strict protection, which is fully or highly protection. So creating effective sanctuaries to protect marine life at sea. We also want the European Commission, yes, to champion this ambition internationally. So we'll have negotiation that will start at the UN level at the end of the year. And the minimum requirement is 30%, which is recommended by science. It's been already supported by a number of pledges. So we've mentioned earlier the Leaders Pledge for Nature, or earlier this week, there was the One Planet Summit, where a number of countries have committed to support this 30%. So it's good news, but in order to achieve this, there are a number of countries that we need to convince internationally. So we need the Commission and the European Union to be strong. The last point is also to expand that ambition to the high seas. So we want the areas beyond national jurisdiction to also be covered, in particular by the completion of the negotiation of the new Global Ocean Treaty. Now, putting a specific focus on the impact of bottom trawling, it's the most destructing fishing gear, and it's widely used in Europe. We often refer to it as a bulldozer of the oceans. It destroys, as you can see on this illustration, all habitats, corals, sponges, shellfish. It's very highly unselective. So a lot of studies have shown today that most of the European marine protected areas are just paper parks. Actually, about 60% of them experience bottom trawling inside them. And we consider this to be incompatible with international standards for protection. So we call on a strict prohibition of the most destructive activities in MPAs, and in particular bottom trawling. At the same time, there's also another important area which is overlooked, which is the coastal areas. It's the most productive part of our oceans. That's where we have sensitive habitats, fish nurseries, but it's also a part of the sea where there's a high concentration of pressures and usage. The European Environmental Agency last year published a report showing that about 79% of the coastal seabed was disturbed physically by bottom trawling. So we're calling on this strategy to also tackle this problem in the coastal areas by creating restrictions in the near shore and coastal waters to protect sensitive habitats, and also a number of countries in the world, such as Brazil or Hong Kong or Sri Lanka or even Belize, have taken those decisions to ban bottom trawling. It's from part of their EEZ or even the entire EEZ. So we're really looking for inspiration globally to push European countries to adopt similar standards. Thanks a lot.
Merci, Nicola. Thank you very much. You were really on time. Next, we have Eleonora Panella from IFAW. Ele, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, depends where are you. Okay, so my colleagues have been talking before on the different threats that they are affecting the oceans and the possibility and the chance that we have right now, of course, to try to revert a bit the trend and make it clear that, of course, as it said in our briefing, biodiversity starts from the oceans. One factor, one sector that of course is relevant when we talk about the health of the ocean is definitely shipping, because it's the biggest, one of the main transport sector. It has been growing extensively in the past years, and of course has a direct impact on the health of the oceans. When we think about shipping sector, immediately we connected with greenhouse gases and emissions, which of course are affecting the environment around us. But most of us, they tend to not to know what's happening below the surface. So what actually some vessels produce, which is underwater noise, which is invisible to our eye, but of course has an extremely important impact to the welfare of cetaceans, but also other marine creatures. So this is why it is very important, and we welcome the fact that was mentioned in the biodiversity strategy itself, that needs to be addressed now and forever and for good, because it's one of those pollutants that once the speed of the vessels is reduced, can really go away, can fade out, differently from other type of pollution like plastic and so on, that needs much bigger and stronger initiative to make sure, which are of course needed, to make sure that they go away. So it can be very fastly addressed. But nevertheless, from 2008, we have in place a directive, which is called the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, where governments were required to address underwater noise, among other factors disturbing the good environmental status of the oceans. Member states were supposed to actually achieve by 2020, so last year, which we all remember forever as the worst year of the century, but actually this hasn't been achieved. So in order to make sure that this is actually addressed, we need to take a resolution and to take strong measures now, because as I was saying, of course, the problem is it's very big and concerning, especially for cetaceans, because for instance, whales can get really lost if there are like underwater noise from shipping, especially, but also from other type of marine factors. And also it is important to notice that basically there is only a small proportion of ships contribute more for most of the noise that is created in the oceans. And those are the older ships that then have proper propellers. So the propeller is basically this structure in the ship that makes the ship moving, and with the movement of the cavitational movement creates the noise that actually are affecting the animals, in this case, as I was saying, cetaceans. So it is a problem, it can be addressed, and that's why we hope that within the biodiversity strategy, and hopefully sooner than 2030, the issue can be addressed. There are several measures that have been discussed already in the past, so not only at the European level with MSFD, but also at IMO level, which is the International Maritime Organization, and there are guidelines that every party should have taken into account since 2014, but unfortunately they haven't been. But at the same time, not only park and government should take their appropriate measure to decrease the noise and the speed of their vessels, but also industry should start building proper ships that are more silent and agree to reduce the speed in sensitive areas where there is more passage of cetaceans and also other species, other marine species. So the measures are there, the means are there, the knowledge is there. It just there's a lack of willingness and starting to take it in real consideration. Thank you.
Grazie mille, Ele. Last but not least, we have Matthew Gianni from the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Yeah, can you hear me okay? Good, thanks. Yeah, my name is Matthew Gianni. I'm based in the Netherlands. I'm with the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, a coalition of organizations from around the world, working since 2004 on the effective conservation of the deep sea. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I'll just give a kind of a brief overview of two of the key issues that we're working on in relation to the biodiversity strategy. But first to say, effective biodiversity conservation cannot be achieved without doing so in the ocean as well as on land. I mean, we know the oceans cover about 70% of the planet. And the deep sea, the area of the ocean below 200 meters depth, represents about 90% of the inhabitable biosphere planet-wide. The diversity of species in the oceans may rival that of tropical forests, but scientists estimate that most of the species in the deep sea have not yet been discovered. Deep sea ecosystems are characterized by long-lived, low fecundity species, meaning species that reproduce only very slowly and in low numbers, and thus are particularly vulnerable to human impacts. And already the deep sea is under threat from climate change impacts such as acidification, deoxygenation, etc., pollution and plastics, and deep sea fishing, in particular deep sea bottom trawling. Deep sea bed mining is an up and coming threat, and I'll speak about the latter two issues, deep sea fishing and deep sea mining, which are directly related to the biodiversity strategy and the hearing that that took place, or the committee meeting that took place today. But first, the good news. In regard to deep sea fisheries, legislation is already in place to manage deep sea fisheries to prevent damage to so-called vulnerable marine ecosystems, such as cold water corals, which are sometimes referred to as the old growth forests of the sea. And you've heard mention of the old growth forests needing protection on land in the hearing in the meeting today at the ENVI committee, and the same really does need to apply in the deep sea. These areas are recognized as biodiversity hotspots, and the deep water fishery with the highest potential for damage is bottom trawling, similar to Nico's presentation on the impacts of bottom trawling in shallower water areas, a method of fishing which involves dragging heavy nets and heavy fishing gears along the seabed. But deep sea bottom trawling has been prohibited in Portuguese and Spanish waters around the Azores, Madeira, and Canary Islands since the mid-2000s, 2005. And in 2016, the EU adopted a regulation to prohibit bottom trawling below 800 meters in EU waters off mainland Portugal, Spain, as well as France, Ireland, and of course the UK at the time. However, at shallower depths, there are deep sea habitats comprised of corals, as well as habitats formed by deep sea sponges and other species all along the European continental margin in the Atlantic that are still vulnerable to bottom fishing. And these are areas which the 2016 deep sea fisheries regulation also requires to be protected. Unfortunately, the protection measures for ecosystems at these depths, due to begin in 2018, have not yet been put into place. And we are calling on the Parliament, as well as the Commission and member states, to do so as a matter of urgency, both to protect these areas which have not been damaged, as well as to allow for restoration of areas which have already been impacted. And this would contribute significantly to implementing the biodiversity strategy. On deep seabed mining, the nations of the world, as members of a UN body called the International Seabed Authority, set up under the UN Law of the Sea, will make a decision in the next few years on whether to open vast tracts of the international area of the deep ocean to seabed mining. Scientists have warned that biodiversity loss will be inevitable if seabed mining is permitted to occur, and the loss will be permanent over thousands to millions of years, including the likelihood that species may be driven extinct before they have even been discovered. The European Union will play a critical role in the decisions taken by the International Seabed Authority. All EU member states are members of the authority, and 7 EU member states, Italy, France, Germany, the Czech Republic, Netherlands, Poland, and Spain, are members of the 36-member Council of the Seabed Authority, the main decision-making body when it comes to the regulations. At the same time, France, Germany, Belgium, and Poland hold 6 of the licenses for exploration for mineral resources in the international deep sea issued by the International Seabed Authority to date. And a 7th exploration licenses has been sponsored by a consortium of countries, including Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Bulgaria. So the EU really does sit at a very critical in a very critical place in which way the International Seabed Authority will go. Altogether, the Seabed Authority has issued 30 licenses to date to explore for minerals covering over 1.3 million square kilometers of seamounts, hydrothermal vents, and deep abyssal plains in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans, with more on the way. If even a fraction of these exploration licensed areas are converted to mining areas, these will be by far the biggest mining operations we've seen to date. We, the SEC, are calling on a moratorium on the adoption of regulations by the ISA, the Seabed Authority, to allow commercial mining until scientists have had a much better understanding of deep sea species, biodiversity, and ecosystems, and the role they play in planetary processes, such as the sequestration of carbon, as well as the risk posed by mining. The European Parliament in 2018 called for a moratorium on deep sea mining, as have the Fisheries Advisory Councils of the European Union and numerous NGOs such as Seas at Risk, Sciaena, Oceana, and others on the call today. You may have heard one of the MEPs this afternoon state it is critical that we don't destroy one ecosystem in an effort to rescue another, and this we think applies to the deep sea as well. To conclude, the biodiversity commitments made by the Commission, the heads of state of all member states, of the European Union at the UN Biodiversity Summit in September of 2020, and others need to be turned into effective action. And again, the European Parliament can, should, and already has played a major role, constructive role on this issue, and we're urging it to continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. Do leave your camera on. I invite the other speakers to turn their cameras on and their microphones, and I will now open the floor for questions from our journalists, our journalist audience. Please don't be shy. Just raise your hand or turn your Simon, please.
Hi, Gonzalo.
Oh, sorry, Louis. Just a second, please.
Yeah, okay.
I saw Simon first. Sorry, Luis, if you allow me to wait just a bit, we'll give you the floor right after. Obrigado. Go ahead, Simon.
Hi, this is Simon Pickstone. I'm a journalist for ENDS Europe. I had a question. I guess this probably relates mainly to trawling, but potentially of interest to some of the other panelists. What are the implications for Brexit in terms of North Sea, I'm thinking particularly of the North Sea and biodiversity conservation? Does this complicate your efforts to try and get consensus on restricting the most destructive fishing practices?
Would like to address?
I'd say Nico first, maybe, and then maybe I can come in on that.
Thanks for the question. I think, I mean, at this stage, I think, regardless of the Brexit situation, most of the member states and the UK on its own, have the competence to, to regulate and restrict the most destructive activities. So if you mention bottom trawling in MPAs, for instance, marine protected areas, it's it's a failure of implementation, and that doesn't really have any relation to Brexit. I mean, now actually Brexit is creating an opportunity. I mean, in the UK, most of the NGOs, as you've probably seen, are calling on that momentum for the government to actually implement what they've committed to do. But in terms of the European strategy, I don't think there's a big problem with that. When it comes to the other idea of restricting bottom trawling in sensitive habitat in coastal areas, same applies. It's essentially what we're asking is now that the Parliament take a stance on the strategy, and that the Commission starts putting out this idea of banning bottom trawling in coastal areas that already exists, for instance, in the Mediterranean. So in the Mediterranean Sea, and there's a number of countries that also adopted voluntarily restrictions in their coastal areas. So yeah, we just want to push that idea of restricting these highly unselective and destructive fishing gear in sensitive habitats and areas. But I don't think Brexit is so relevant in that respect. But yeah, Matt.
Yeah. Now, just quickly on deep sea trawling and deep sea fisheries generally, Brexit may actually be somewhat helpful in the sense that, for example, at the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Committee, a treaty organization that regulates the high seas, deep water fisheries, and others in the Northeast Atlantic. It met in November and adopted a prohibition on fishing for orange roughy, a deep water trawl fishery targeting seamounts in the Northeast Atlantic. That is, a highly unsustainable fishery. And had been allowed for the last 10 to 12 years because the voting structure of the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission was such that they couldn't get a sufficient majority needed to pass a prohibition. But the UK became an additional member of NEAFC, the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission, in October of this year, and voted against to prohibit orange roughy fishery in November, and that kind of swung the tally in the direction of adopting a prohibition. So in that sense, at least, it's actually proven somewhat helpful in terms of international deep sea fisheries conservation measures.
Thank you very much.
That's really interesting. Thanks.
Luis, please, and apologies for not spotting you.
No, it's okay. Gonçalo, I think my question is for Rebecca. Rebecca talked about the precautionary buffers for climate change when setting fishing limits. I would like to ask a few examples how that can be achieved.
Thank you for the question, Lewis. Yeah, at the moment, ICES provides advice, scientific advice for fishing limits according to maximum sustainable yield for EU member states. And what we've seen a number of times is, with many stocks actually, is that the predictions of the impact of the catch, or the predictions for the improvement of the populations, is more ambitious, and after the fact they need to be revised down. So essentially they're anticipating that the populations are going to do better, and then after, in the following subsequent assessments, they realize that they're not doing as well. And by having precautionary buffers, of course, this isn't, I don't believe this is happening right now, is that you would basically be trying to assess the fisheries in a much more cautionary manner, because the impact of climate change, of warming waters, potentially acidification on those populations is quite unknown. So it could be that that the scientists might recommend to fish below maximum sustainable yield, or to try and restore the population numbers to a greater size so that they're more resilient and stronger in the face of climate change. So at the moment it's not being done, and exactly how it gets done would be up to the scientists to decide. But that is definitely something that we would like to see, particularly because with some populations, as I said, they're not doing as well, even though the catches have been decreased.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you so much.
Karen McVeigh, please.
Oh, hi. Yeah, sorry, my camera's not working properly. I just wanted to ask a really quick question, and then I need to hop off. But I'd spoken to Rebecca earlier, earlier in the week. But I just wanted to be clear. There's quite a lot in this 10-point plan, and it covers an awful lot of areas. And so I wanted to ask, really, it seems that what you're saying is that the EU member states have failed to achieve achieve good environmental status, that the laws have not been implemented at the moment, and that this is an opportunity for the EU to, in its strategy, sort of biodiversity strategy, to address that. So what do you see as the kind of the most important part of it that they need to do urgently, or is there any, what is the most kind of urgent action that is needed? Is it the implementation of existing laws? Is it, banning damaging bottom trawling?
Yeah, I think every person on this panel might have a different idea of the priority, but I think definitely, I mean, I don't work on marine protected areas at Our Fish, but definitely eliminating destructive fishing from protected areas is an urgent priority. But I also think that there are other priorities, such as really taking implementing the existing laws to protect species, sensitive species, and to stop overfishing would make massive gains. So they're probably, I think, the three, I would say, are kind of the three top items. And then, but this biodiversity strategy also is an opportunity, I think, for the EU to really get on the front foot in terms of shifting to a more ecosystem-based approach to marine management, but also, I mean, potentially, this is an opportunity to put in place some kind of directive that can hold the member states accountable for the implementing these laws, because at the moment they're not being implemented and they're just getting away with it. There is absolutely no repercussion for the member states for failing to apply these laws. So they can continue polluting the marine environment, they can continue destroying critical ecosystems, and they're not actually suffering any financial or legal cost for that. So I believe that actually ensuring the do no harm policy is complied with is a huge opportunity here as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. We are on the, oh, sorry, you have a follow-up question, Karen?
No, I'm good, thank you.
So we're on the time that we had set aside for this. I don't know if anyone wants to add a quick note, any one of the speakers, since we don't have any more questions. If not, I would, oh, Nico, go ahead, Nicola, please.
Yeah, no, I think I just wanted to, I think it's one of the reasons why we wanted to launch this manifesto is because the Parliament starts, considering their opinions. So there are a number of committees that are looking at providing their opinions on this EU biodiversity strategy. The lead committee is the Environment Committee, but there's also the International Affairs Committee, the Fisheries Committee, the Agricultural Committee. So there's a number of developments in parallel, and we are looking to try to influence as much as possible and raise the ambition of the strategy. And we can already see, that there are diverging views, obviously, on, for instance, whether there should be binding targets and issues like this. So it's an exciting moment, but we hope that in light of the previous resolution, the Parliament has already, endorsed the climate and environmental emergency. They've also endorsed a number of resolutions on biodiversity. So we really hope that we can raise the ambition and send a strong signal that ocean matters and restoring nature is critical for also achieving the green the Green Deal. So thanks everyone for tuning in.
Matt, quick note, then
I think Andrea had her hand up as well, but maybe I'll just go quickly just to say that, you know, as NGOs, we take some of the commitments that the science and the commitments seriously that we've been hearing over the last several years and longer, as Rebecca indicated in her introductory remarks. You know, the fact that the International Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services issued a report last year saying, 2019, saying 1 million species are at risk of extinction over the next several decades is a serious issue. And the fact that virtually all, I believe, heads of state, as well as Ursula von der Leyen, Boris Johnson on behalf of the UK, and altogether 79 heads of states, the World Bank and the GEF, all committed in September of 2020 to reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. A lot of the actions that need to be taken are going to have to be taken by the member states, and the Parliament is one very, very strong way of holding them accountable to these commitments. And so as NGOs, we feel that the parliamentary process, which often is more open to European citizens than some of the national-based processes for decision-making, is a really important forum in which for us to work and to act and to prod the European Union overall to take these kinds of actions necessary.
Thank you, Matt. Andrea?
Yes, very quickly. Yeah, I just wanted to end up in a note saying that I wanted to highlight the importance of including considerations for ocean conservation in the strategy, because sometimes I feel that it's a bit forgotten. And when I watched this afternoon the debate in the Parliament, I really missed hearing much more the word ocean by the MEPs. So just like a pledge and a reminder of how important ocean, like a healthy ocean, is for the conservation of biodiversity overall, how it's even losing biodiversity at a rate higher than at land, and how we really need to work together also with you, the press and journalists, to pass this message on and to make sure that we really are able to hold the biodiversity crisis, but without forgetting the important piece of the puzzle, which is the ocean.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Good point. I will give the floor quickly to Bruna Campos from BirdLife. She was not a speaker today, but she is one of the many heads that put together the Back to the Source document. Bruna, if you may, you can turn on your camera. Quick.
Hi, I'm not going to turn on my camera because otherwise my internet's really slow. I'll just want to be very quick because one of the things that I think we want to say here is that there is already a lot of evidence to what we're talking about. And I think is one of the things that we want to flag, especially for journalists who want to read more about it. I just want to quickly mention one of them, which is related to subsidies. We've been doing a lot of campaigning on subsidies because actually that's one of the biggest impacts we have on the oceans. Is, you know, these impacts that you have, these bottom trawlers, they are getting subsidies, they are being financed, they're actually not lucrative unless they get subsidies. So that's one of the things that we've been talking quite a lot about, is sort of just take the money away from these harmful impacts from these harmful fishing vessels, and you probably can do a lot of good already. And the other thing is to just put the money where it's needed, where you can have actually restoration projects, you can have projects to sort of to help like local communities co-manage marine protected areas. And this is also something we've written quite a lot about, and there's also a really good document that I can refer to you as Turning the Tide. And it just really gives examples of a green recovery, of where to put the money to actually achieve all these things that we've listed here. So I just wanted to flag that because I think it was Karen, she's not in the call anymore, and she says, like, what is the top one? There's so many top things that you can do, as Rebecca was saying, but basically starting with the financing, where the money is, just don't give the money to the wrong people and give it to the right people. You'll get there much quicker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruno. I think that wraps up quite well our session. I don't think anyone else raised their hand, and in any case, we really should be closing, I think the top message is start walking the walk and not only talking the talk. We will, of course, the speakers and all of our organizations will be available for follow-up conversations with all of you. We will be sending a follow-up email with the recording of this session today, but also additional information, additional documents, and also the presentations. And of course, the contacts of our speakers and other NGO representatives that can develop any of the points on the back to the source document. So I would like to thank everyone, starting with the speakers, but also with the journalists that were present, also the NGO colleagues that were listening to us today. And yes, stay safe, and hopefully the spring will bring the start of the end of this pandemic. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and till soon.